Okay, so I've been bumbling around in fairly local forests for more than a couple seasons now. But from time to time over the last 4 years, I've kind of wondered or thought about taking a vacation where I could do some off road riding in a place a lot further from home than I usually go. Scoped out some organized rides in the US, mainly kind of in the Arizona or Utah area. I even briefly played with the idea to do some riding in Vietnam. But as I started to think more about what I really wanted to get out of this trip, I realized what I actually needed was someone to show me how to ride my dual sport properly. I'd been to a one-day course in the past, and it did help me, but I needed more. Those organized rides I found in the US would provide me with some training, but I wasn't sure it would be in-depth enough. After all, by this point, I've been riding off-road in my own kind of creative style for a few years. It's going to be difficult to wipe out all that and get a fresh start. Then I noticed something on the Traction eRag website had changed. Back in 2016 or so, I bought a KLR 650. I remember when I got that thing, I was going to travel the world on it. And, most of it was going to be on unpaved roads. But anyway, so when I had that idea in my head, one of the first things that I started to do was search the internet for info about riding off-road in Canada. Of course, I found and signed up for the eRag to hit my inbox whenever a new issue was released. It was awesome. It was informative, and it had this edgy humor about it that I could really appreciate. But unfortunately, a few years ago, eRag caught COVID and it didn't survive. Well, it's not exactly what happened, but it's close enough to the longer version of the story. So all that was left for me to access from my basement was a website advertising some swag and rides you could sign up for that looked way above my riding abilities. Then I saw the newly added XTADV ride. It looked to be about a 50-50 mix of detailed instruction on small light motorcycles and trail rides in the amazing mountains of British Columbia, Canada. Take my money, please. Clicked on the apply button on the webpage, and that began a vetting process that started with a brief questionnaire and a short phone call. This is essentially to weed out any potential asshats and people that don't fit the demographic this course is designed for, which is basically people who have some motorcycle riding experience, but little or no off-road experience. Wait, I said I'd been riding off-road since 2016 or so. How can 9 seasons of off-road riding not make me overqualified for an entry-level course? It's fairly easy to explain. Sure, I've been throwing camping equipment onto motorcycles and riding them into the forest to camp for a while now, but the vast majority of my training so far, nothing more than YouTube videos and me guessing that I was doing things at least close to correctly. I was not. I could tell by the amount of luck and momentum that I was relying on to get me over or through obstacles. I described my level of off-road experience to Dallas. He's the head reprobate at Traction, and he agreed. This course would help me. Dallas and I talked a bit more, during which he described what the XTADV course, facilities, and experience would be like. I remember at one point warning Dallas that his description was setting a very high bar for what I was going to get in return for my money. Dallas reiterated that he was confident my expectations would be met. A bit of a spoiler here, they were not only met, they were exceeded. Anyway, I hung up the phone and sent in a deposit to hold my place in the group. I began the most important task of convincing my friend and neighbor Dan to come with me. Just a little bit about Dan here. He's been a friend of mine for about 15 years. We've gone on motorcycle rides together, but never off-road. Dan has 0 off-road experience. Trying something he'd never done before was totally Dan's style, and he too managed to sneak through the asshat test. We booked our flights to Vancouver, started to gather and organize the equipment we'd need to take with us, and very impatiently waited for 3 months to pass. Once the day finally arrived, Dan and I got an early start, boarded our flight to Vancouver, then hopped on another short flight to Kamloops, where we found some of the Traction eRag crew waiting for us. AT and Theo rounded up the group I'd be spending the week with, loaded us into a van with Satan at the wheel. Seriously, it'll make sense later on. And a couple of short stops to pick up any last-minute supplies, and we were soon at the Traction eRag headquarters. Dan and I exited the van, Satan retrieved our bags for us, and we headed to our assigned accommodations. A spacious glamping-style tent with 2 cots, complete with mattresses and pillows, a table, 2 chairs, and a propane heater with more than enough heat. We laid out our sleeping bags, got our belongings organized, and went to meet the rest of the reprobate hopefuls that had arrived with us. After a couple of hours by the fire, Dan and I retreated back to our tent, tried to sleep. Nervous excitement about what tomorrow would bring made it difficult, but I know I at least managed a few hours of sleep before we awoke Monday morning.
Monday brought the first of 5 basically perfect weather days. We really couldn't have gotten a better week as far as weather was concerned. Dan and I headed down to the main lodge for a new standard in breakfast as far as I'm concerned. I'm not a big eater, I'm not a foodie kind of guy at all, but I will say this, every meal we were served there was amazing, and there was always more than I could eat. After breakfast, Dallas had a bit of a meeting with us about things around the camp, kind of like what we were in store for, what we could expect as far as a rough daily routine for the week, some basic housekeeping rules around the camp and stuff like that. After that, we were set free to pretty much do as we pleased, but we were told to have our butts on bikes by 9 a.m. And when they say 9 a.m., they really mean 8:55. Dan and I headed up, hung out with the rest of the reprobates for a bit, and then got our gear on and made our way on down to the bikes. Once everyone was at their bike, Dallas and the crew led us to this like sprawling meadow that we would use for drills and training every morning. First couple we did was we started with things like body position and static balance, and we used those basic skills throughout the entire week and just kept building on them.
That way?
Each morning we'd go back to that same meadow and learn some new skills based on whatever we had done the previous day type thing. In addition to the body position and static balance, we learned things like standing corning, seated corning, emergency braking, other dirt bike-ish kind of stuff. After the morning training session, we'd head back to the main lodge for lunch, which was usually something like a sandwich/salad kind of layout. There'd be another meeting at lunch about the afternoon's optional ride. Optional is kind of like, well, still got some energy to burn? Want to practice those new skills? Go on the ride. If you're exhausted, and believe me, this dirt bike stuff, I've learned, it's a lot of work, especially when you're learning and fighting the bike when you shouldn't be. Anyway, if you're too tired to go out, then feel free to hang out at camp for the afternoon. Dan and I opted to go for the ride. We were feeling pretty good, so it was butts on bikes once again at 1:30 p.m. Once everyone was there, it was time to ride.
Go.
Each afternoon we were taking on a ride that was a really good blend of stuff that everyone could handle but was fun, and with the odd kind of push your comfort zone section thrown in. Always optional, of course. The scenery in these rides was totally incredible. Riding through the trees in the mountains of BC was the most amazing view that I've ever seen. I'm going to remember this place forever. We usually finish the rides with ample time to get cleaned up before dinner, which is back at the main lodge at 6 p.m. And again, with the meals, dinner was always fantastic. Every meal was just phenomenal. There was a ton of variety, always more than I could eat, and it was made fresh in-house. No prepackaged stuff or anything like that. With dinner finished, we'd have a final meeting for the day, which usually covered the day's past events and let us know a bit about tomorrow's training, what we're going to be up to in the morning. After this, we could hang out at the lodge until 8 p.m. when it closed for the night, or head up to the cabins and tents for some conversation around a fire. Every night, us reprobates, and often some of the eRag staff, would end our day like this. Every night, there was some very interesting and always entertaining conversations around that fire. This would continue on until, one by one, we all decided it was time to get some sleep. I was usually headed to bed around 10 or 10:30, leaving 3 or 4 others, always including Dan, at the fire. We'd wake up the next morning and repeat this process daily, with the exception being Friday. Friday ended up being a day that had some optional training and a much longer ride than the rest of the days, but that's going to be the next video.